Welcome to Eddie Muff channel. We are starting a new series of video on the English translation of the Bible. The motivation for starting this series of video is actually twofold. First of all, we have millions of Christians around the world who are using English version of the Bible for their Bible study or devotional, and it's always important to know what are the Greek manuscript upon which these translations are based and how close these translations are to the original writing of the New Testament. And we are focusing on the New Testament because there is less mass controversy around the Old Testament book. Why? Because the Jewish scribes throughout history have faithfully translated the Old Testament with taking great care and diligence that led to really very little controversy around the content of the Old Testament. But when it comes to the New Testament, there is much more controversies and less consensus around which Greek text copy of the New Testament that we have in existence today are closer to the original writing of the apostle. And that's what we're going to try to address as the first motivation for this series. The second motivation has to do with skeptics, critics, atheists, Muslims who are claiming that the Christians have so many Bible versions, nobody know what the truth is, nobody know which one are closer to the original writing, and they contradict one another. So there's a lot of issues around the Bible translation. So we want to address those critics by starting this series of video. And just for your information, we have today in existence over 5,300 Greek manuscripts of the New Testament that are available, and the two main families actually are characterizing these Greek manuscripts. So we have, first of all, what we call the Alexandrian or critical text of the New Testament, or what we call also the minority text, which is probably between 8 to 10% of all the extant manuscript that we have today. And not that the NIV, the New International Version, the ESV, the English Standard Version, the NASB, the New American Standard Bible, the NRSV, the New Revised Standard Version, the NLT, the New Living Translation, etc., etc. They are all based on what we call the Alexandrian Greek text of the New Testament. And then the second family that we have is called the Byzantine or Antiochian text of the New Testament, or what we call the majority text, because most of the existent Greek manuscripts are part of this family of manuscript. And notice that the Textus Receptus, upon which the King James was translated, which was written by Erasmus around 1516, is based on the majority text of the New Testament. We also have the King James Version, the New King James, and the modern English version of the Bible. They're all based on the majority text of the Greek manuscript. So many contemporary scholars today of what we call textual criticism, we have these two major families. Some hold to the view that the older the manuscript we have, the closer it is to the original writing of the New Testament. And some subscribe to that view, and we have others which claim that the majority texts that we have are actually the texts upon which these original writing were based upon. So, and then we have three types of translation. We have what we call formal equivalence translation, which is basically a literal translation of those Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. So we have so word for word translation, which is a literal one, and the English version that we have, they cut across these types of translation. Okay, whether it's Alexandrian or Byzantine, we have these different type of translation that are being used to translate the Bible in English. And then we have a second type of translation which is called dynamic equivalence, where the text is rendered in a phrase for phrase or thought for thought process. This is how the Bible is translated. And then we have the last type of translation called paraphrase, where the translator uses his own word to capture the meaning of a text. So these are the different type of translation that we have. And for your information, we have the oldest existing manuscript that we have today are Alexandrian, as we mentioned it earlier. So we have two main manuscripts, almost complete manuscript of the Bible, which include both the Old Testament and the New Testament. The first one is called the Codex Vaticanus. As its name indicates, it's located in the Vatican, and it's also available online today for everybody to access. The Codex Vaticanus, which is dated between 300 and 330 AD. Okay, in the 4th century AD, that manuscript actually was dated around that period, and it contained the entire Old Testament, the 39 book of the Old Testament, and it has 22 of the 27 book of the New Testament. It's only missing the pastoral epistle of Paul and the book of Hebrew. So 22 books. And also we have the second codex called Codex Sinaiticus, and it has the 27 book of the Old Testament, of the New Testament, and half of the 39 book of the Old Testament. And you can see the link here on the screen, and you can go and check it out. And these are the oldest existing Greek manuscript of the New Testament, which also includes some of the Old Testament book, and they are huge. And in the history of ancient texts, this is not comparable to any other sacred text. Okay, whether it's Islam or whether it's other ancient texts, this is unique to Christianity, and it's a wealth of information that we have which help us trace back the original writing of these apostles, and even for the Old Testament as well. And we have now, for those critics who will jump and say, you see here now somebody who's coming to show us all the differences between Bible translation, which actually support our view. Those atheists, skeptic Muslims who are claiming that the English version of the Bible is not reliable. I just want to point out some fact to you so you can be informed of what is the truth basically behind these translations of the Bible. Experts who are textual scholars, this is what they are saying. Okay, they affirm that the Byzantine or the majority text differ from the Alexandrian, which is the minority or critical text, in only 6,500 places between the two. And notice what they're saying. They're saying almost 98% all of the time, these two texts are almost the same. Okay? And the disagreement rests upon only the 2% of these two Greek manuscripts of the New Testament. Okay? And the disagreement is related to minor differences. Okay? Which has no bearing on the meaning. So just to put it into perspective for those critics who are claiming there's differences because we have so many manuscripts, but all the translation of the Bible are based on these two families of manuscript. for the New Testament as far as it's concerned. Okay, so there is no much issue. The controversy is on the 2%, and we're going to get into more detail when we look at specifically at these differences between the English version of the Bible. So in this series, we're going to address a number of questions. Okay, and I would like to point out those questions. What are those questions? So first of all, we're going to answer the question, how does the King James Version, remember it's based on the majority text, the Byzantine text, how does it compare to some modern version of the Bible, such as the NIV, the ESV, the NASB, the New Revised Standard Version, etc., etc. So we're going to do that comparison by taking some modern version, because many Christians are using it. Again, it's important to see what is the underlying text which is behind the translation and what type of methods they are using to translate faithfully what were in the original text. Second question, is the King James Version closer to the original writing of the New Testament compared to the modern version? That's a legitimate question, and we want to know what the answer is, looking at the evidence. Third question, does the Textus Receptus, upon which the King James Version was translated, agree 100% with the majority Greek text of the New Testament? Legitimate question for those who are relying upon the King James in particular. How does the Textus Receptus compare with the Alexandrian or the critical text? Very important question also. Fourth question, how do paraphrase translation such as the Message, and the Message is actually being used by millions of Christians today, how does it compare with the King James Version? We want to answer that question. And is the Message a reliable translation of God's Word? For those Christians who are using the Message, we want to also give them some information so they can make an informed decision regarding the reliability of the Message. Okay? Fifth series of questions, do patristic quotation from church fathers of the New Testament, do they favor the majority text, or are they more aligned with the critical text, which is the Alexandrian text? Okay, a question also we would like to provide some answer to. And the last set of videos, we will devote it to zooming into the Gospel of Mark, because there is a lot of controversy among textual scholars and Christian and pastors and everything around the ending of the Gospel of Mark. Okay? The question is, do the original writing of the apostles, okay, do they contain the long ending of Mark, which include verse 9 to 20? Or is it, does the Gospel of Mark end in verse 8? Okay, chapter 16, Mark chapter 16, does it end at verse 8, or does it include verse 9 to 20? Scholars are divided, and it's very important as Christians that we know what the original writings are and what are the implications for our belief, for what we believe as Christians, that God's Word is infallible and contain the entire truth. What we have today in our English version, we want to know whether they correspond to the original writing of the apostle. Very important question, and I'm going to stop here. I thank you for your attention, and I would like to ask you to stay tuned so we can go over all these series of questions, and we're going to try to answer one by one all these questions. May God bless you, and stay tuned for the upcoming video.